Hey there, thanks for tuning into Duckbricks. I'm Chris, and LEGO Classic Space has been one of the most iconic LEGO themes throughout all of LEGO's history. From the multicolored spacemen to the incredibly iconic builds of the spaceships, LEGO Classic Space has always represented a platform where you can build your own stories and really try to create your own universe when it comes to the space exploration of LEGO minifigures. But did you know that Classic Space actually has lore? That's right, despite the fact that Classic Space came out in the 1980s, back when LEGO wasn't really giving story or lore to their original themes, we actually did get this book, The Fantastic Adventures of Jim Spaceborn, The Unknown Galaxy, which is, to my knowledge, the only time that we ever got Classic Space lore in physical format. And I actually have the actual book right here to showcase for all of you. Special thanks to Christian Faber, the creator of LEGO Bionicle, for actually giving me this book and letting me dive through it in detail. I cannot wait to showcase this because this is super cool how it actually explains a lot of the backstories and storylines of what they were thinking when Classic Space was coming out in the 1980s. And so, let's dive into our look at Jim Spaceborn, The Unknown Galaxy. Okay, so this is Jim Spaceborn, The Unknown Galaxy, aka the hidden lore behind Classic Space. So this is a book that actually came out all the way back in the 1980s. I'm gonna try and figure out what exact year this was released, but it definitely is one of the oldest ones. Yeah, 1986 over there. And it's a really interesting oddity because obviously back in the day, LEGO wasn't really based around making stories for their characters. They were really trying to make their original themes stand on their own as just universes that you could play in. And aside from the occasional comic in a LEGO Club magazine, or maybe a short story here and there in some sort of promotional material, we didn't really get original stories for LEGO themes until much, much later. In fact, Classic Space was one of the very first original LEGO themes, and because of that, there's little to no story material out there, well, except for this. This is quite an oddity. It features the black-suited spacemen as the villains, because of course Blacktron didn't even exist yet, and introduced a robot named Keko, who actually has been referenced in a lot of other LEGO media, most recently in an employee-only gift, which featured Keko as a buildable character, which you could have gotten if you were working in Bill in Denmark last year. And it's a really interesting book because it talks through the actual quote-unquote lore of the Classic Spacemen themselves. Now, they put a lot of effort into this, so much so that they actually made a gigantic classic spaceship, the Spearhead here, which was made for basically, they made it from a real model. It's 117 centimeters long, 56 centimeters wide, and it took an actual model designer at LEGO to make it. So clearly there was a lot of advertising effort into putting this together, and it is a full-on story. This is an entire story behind Classic Space, The Unknown Galaxy. And I love this book so much because, first of all, this is kind of a pulpy, sort of classic space style of thing, sort of something that you would see back in the 1980s and even before that, like the space age stuff from the 60s and so on, which had a really exciting look towards what the exploration of space could be. And that sort of aesthetic and that tale and that kind of passion behind adventuring and exploring space is very present throughout this book. Now, why am I making a video on this? Well, first of all, this book is incredibly rare, and once again, I do have to thank Christian Faber for letting me take this copy back to do a video on, because this book is one of the rarest books that you can find in general. Like, not just LEGO books. This is a really hard book to get a hold of. I couldn't really find anybody selling it online. I only know of like one other person in the LEGO community who actually owns this, and because of that, I really wanted to highlight it in a video that kind of goes through what is the story of the Unknown Galaxy and what is this about. And I'm not going to be reading through every single page, but I will be giving kind of a brief overview of what we're looking at here in terms of the story, because it is a really interesting look into what LEGO was considering to be classic space lore. So the main character of the story is Jim Spaceborn. He basically was found abandoned on a mysterious spaceship when he was small and was taken in. Bart Seeker is the captain of the Spearhead, which is the main ship seen in the book. Interestingly, they didn't use something like the Galaxy Explorer. They actually made a gigantic ship just for this. Duncan is the engineer of the ship, and of course he's kind of taken Jim in and taught him everything he needs to know. Viva is the chief pilot, which actually is pretty in line with what we would see from the classic space sets, where the red-suited astronauts were always the pilots. So that was pretty cool to see here. And then there was a supercomputer named Mags, and of course that one played a pretty pivotal role. It was very much kind of like a HAL 9000 type of archetype in the story, but it's really interesting seeing how they actually were able to create these characters and stories just based on the classic space astronauts. So the story begins is that the gigantic spaceship Spearhead is returning home to the planet Zonia. So the first piece of information we have is that Zonia is the home planet of the classic space men and women. So obviously they're expecting to be home in a couple of hours, but then of course our main character, the Jim Spaceborn here, is kind of just looking around the engineering room, and Duncan is showing off his new transformation machine. And this kind of looks like a 1x2 jumper plate. I first thought it was a camera piece, then I remember the camera didn't even exist yet. So yeah, clearly it is literally just a 1x2 plate and then a 1x2 jumper on top of it, and they have turned it into this transformation device. And you can see some of the vehicles from the sets here, but it actually turns itself into another transformat, so that kind of hints at the plot of what we're going on here. But what's going on is that basically they're trying to figure out what is going on in terms of why they're moving away from Zonia, in terms of just drifting away from home. However, the order to change course came from the captain's control panel, so they think something has happened. Maybe the captain has caused them to divert their course, and all the lights go off, something is going on, the supercomputer is not making any sense, but they seem to be pulling into some sort of powerful force of a black hole. And I love how they've depicted the black hole here. It's just simply an absence of light in the starry galaxy there in a perfect circle, which is super cool. But anyway, it transports the spaceship into a different universe. So it says they go through, smack through a black hole here, and they're trying to figure out what their position is. Of course, that then makes them send out an exploratory craft, which you may recognize as something that sort of looks like an actual classic spaceship that we did get, even though it is a little bit different. It actually is kind of a unique design in comparison to some of the actual classic space sets. But they find this mysterious city on the planet's surface as they're trying to explore. Turns out they don't need their spacesuits because the pressure is okay, and they meet these aliens. And this is, again, another really interesting thing, because obviously, as we know, there are some designs for LEGO Alien minifigures that are dated back to around this era, especially this guy with kind of a long snout, like appendage there, and of course you have like the Seatron-esque minifigure. I don't know if these are based off of any LEGO minifigures that maybe were meant to be or canceled, but it is super interesting seeing those design philosophies actually make their way into this book, because obviously we did not ever get LEGO Alien minifigures until the UFO series many years down the line, but it is cool to see aliens be depicted in this sort of thing. So anyway, they're going through the city, they find like someone that has a star chart of the universe, and this is where they find Keko the robot. So this is they're trying to barter the alien for the robot there, and it's super interesting how they actually come across this. But then they see some of these black-suited astronauts, and the most interesting thing here is that obviously they don't have the classic space logo at all, because they're not supposed to be from the same universe, they're in a different part of the galaxy. But they named their leader Kazak, and Kazak wants the robot for some reason. And it's really interesting because they seem to have almost like a Lego castle-inspired shield emblem on them, and they're all numbered. So I don't know where they actually got the original design for these, but again, all of the black-suited astronauts have a almost castle-inspired design, like they were just using torsos and designs there. But eventually the robot wakes up, fights off the evil black-suited astronauts here, and we don't know really where they're coming from. But basically, it befriends Jim Spaceborn and his friend, what was his friend's name here? Viva, the chief pilot. So Viva and Jim, they become friends with Keko the robot, and the black-suited spacemen say they're going to report back to Kazak, and clearly all of the aliens know of this mysterious Kazak. So again, they take the robot back with them, back to the ship. They go onto the ship, and Duncan actually manages to repair a couple of things with the robot itself. But of course, these black-suited astronauts, Kazak's goons, are terrorizing the town in the meantime, trying to find it, and he says that Kazak is the space bandit. So Kazak has his own galaxy, apparently, or at least he's situated in this galaxy. He arrived a few years ago, the vicious thugs control most of the planets, and look at that. That is almost like a proto-Blacktron fleet here, where you have that black and yellow color scheme, but they almost look like X-Wing starfighters. Obviously, this was the 1980s, so Star Wars was really all the rage, but you can see like these X-Wing-like designs. You have what looks to be almost like an early version of the main Blacktron Renegade flagship, which is super, super interesting because, again, none of these ships were actually official LEGO sets. They just kind of came up with this story. One other thing you might notice is that the minifigures are not yellow toned, but instead flesh toned. Again, another strange oddity of this particular book. But again, the Kekko robot says that they turned the skies black over his home planet Robus. It fell upon them like a swarm of bats. They're super advanced robots. Basically, they're alive, but they weren't made for fighting, so Kazak was easily able to take over. And it is so interesting seeing these black and yellow designs, which would eventually become Blacktron kind of before then, but most of his kind were taken prisoner. He landed on Commercia, which is a planet they're on, but now the evil forces of Kazak are making their way to the planet, and that is a formidable fortress right there that they've built up. So, super interesting to see here. And now there's kind of an internal debate going on in terms of, well, they need to get home, they need to get the Spearhead home, they can't really take on his own fleet, but Kekko can come with them if they want. But of course, the rest of Kekko's people are imprisoned, so they need to actually figure out how to free them. This is what Kazak looks like, by the way. He's got a number 1 printed on his helmet there, and all the other ones are just numbered down based on him. But they managed to get the Transformat, so they're able to use it to take things apart and put them together again. So they kind of are able to repurpose it as some sort of a weapon. So anyways, Kekko is being shown around the Spearhead, which actually has a working hotel room in it, which is pretty cool. You can see they get like a key to a room, and that's what that looks like. His room is a view of the generator, which is so cool, and I love seeing all of these classic space components here. But this is super interesting. Kekko's saying he's just got to go home and go back and help his people, so he really can't leave. But then they realize that they can actually take apart the robots in a surprisingly cruel twist. They just took a robot prisoner and just took apart the robots. So they basically just figured out a way to kill the robots, which is very unfortunate. Doesn't work on people, because obviously they did first attempt human trials, but you got to start with human trials. So that didn't work, but it does work on robots. But then they launch off in the starship, where they realize that they really do need to save Kekko's people. And back on Robus, they managed to say that it's time to kind of fight back against the evil forces of Kazak. They consume some fruit to recharge their battery, which actually makes sense. The acid generates electricity, which is pretty cute. But then, now that they are on Robus, they've basically taken off to Robus to save Kekko's people, but then their ship basically gets destroyed by a giant falling fruit. So now they're like, okay, well, how do we get back to the Spearhead ship without our ship itself? So then they all encounter different types of robots. All of these were, of course, fully buildable out of Lego. So this is kind of like a Lego Technic-inspired robot over here. But then they figured out how to mass produce the Transformat on the side of evil. So now they want to use it to take over the galaxy. And look at his face over there. But then they located the Spearhead, so now they're in trouble as well. There's a whole battle going on between the Spearhead and Kazak. But then they try to figure out a way to surprise Kazak when he's using the Transformat to essentially turn it against them. Again, it's really cool to see all these early designs for these evil ships. I kind of want to try to recreate these myself because it is an early part of classic space lore. You've got all your multicolored aliens going on over here, and Duncan creates a brand new invention, which doesn't seem like it really corresponds to any particular Lego piece. I mean, maybe those are supposed to be just the underside of plates, but basically, these are protection devices that will make the Transformat rays not work on them, so the evil forces of Kazak cannot take apart the robots. Anyway, it is just in time because, of course, look at that. That's a very Star Wars-like line. Rebel base in sight, attacking stations. The black-suited people are attacking, and as it turns out, their Transformats do not work. So they can't attack them. Looks like the Spearhead up in space is in danger. Now it is a full-on assault force on the castle itself because the robots cannot be harmed by the Transformats. They instead just bounce backwards. So the robots are absolutely storming the place. Kazak is sending his people out, but they are not faring well against the robots. And that is just such a cool base to see for the evil forces. That's like a Blacktron-style castle there. And of course, the end of the story is pretty simple in that they just go ahead, storm the castle, manage to figure out how to capture or defeat Kazak, and eventually he flees, he tries to run away, and the spearhead wins, the crew is victorious, and the spearhead arrives that saves all of the robots after Kazak has been defeated. So the idea is that essentially Kazak it's kind of ended on a cliffhanger, because the final thing the villains say is that they say someone's escaped, Kazak, you'll never catch him. So maybe this could be like some early lore, like potentially Kazak fled and maybe he founded Blacktron and that's where Blacktron came from. They do have a very similar color scheme after all. So this kind of ties into future stuff with LEGO Space. And there we have it, Keko now joining the crew on the main ship, and they're headed back to Zonia now. I don't know how exactly they're going to get back, given that they went through a black hole, but you know, that's a story for another time. And that about ends the story there. They did include hand-drawn building instructions for how to make Keko the robot, and even some different alternate versions of him. Keko's grandmother, his uncle, and his dog, which is so cute. But yeah, this is about summing up the original lore for Classic Space, even teaching you how to make a lunar landscape out of newspaper, which is super cute. And there you have the credits, just a really bizarre LEGO publishing book. The play starts where the story ends, so that it was kind of your encouragement to get some LEGO Space stuff. One of the very few and early releases from LEGO Publishing, and I'm just really glad I was able to share this on a video, because this is a really interesting plot thread for LEGO Space. I am sure that it was basically just come up with by like one author trying to piece together some sort of story from the LEGO sets, but I just think it's so cute how they were able to tie in the different factions and the spacemen, and even have the black-suited spacemen be the villains of the story. And of course it does end on a cliffhanger, so for the absolutely crazy LEGO Space lore enthusiasts, you could imagine that the evil villain actually managed to escape, and maybe he comes back in the form of Blacktron later on. So this kind of leads into more LEGO Space stuff. It's just a really interesting oddity. I very rarely do book reviews and showcases on this channel, but I figured this was an important enough document to go through, to showcase, and definitely stay tuned for a lot more, because we will be going through a lot more of Christian Faber's original documents as well. Now, I will leave you with just one final thing, one of the coolest things that I was able to pick up, because over here, we have a hand-drawn original alien UFO drawing here that was meant to appear in LEGO Club magazine. So definitely a lot more space stuff to get through, so stay tuned for more stuff to be unboxed from Christian Faber's collection. But first of all, just wanted to showcase the Unknown Galaxy. Never ever thought in a million years I would actually physically own this book. Thankfully, if you want to read it yourselves, the PDF is available online. I've linked it in the description below. And I hope you enjoyed this look at the Unknown Galaxy book. Super cool piece of LEGO history. Alright, and that sums up our look at this incredibly interesting piece of LEGO history, the Unknown Galaxy, showcasing some of the lore behind LEGO Classic Space. Let me know down in the comments, what do you think of this book? Do you like or dislike the story? And have you ever read this yourselves? Of course, in the description, I've attached a PDF where you can watch this. Thank you so much for tuning into Duckbricks, and be sure to like and subscribe for even more LEGO news, reviews, discussion, and analyses coming your way very soon, and bye for now.